A cold, pale dawn stretched across the Baltic Sea, the kind that makes metal surfaces look sharper and shadows feel heavier. Commercial air traffic moved along its usual invisible corridors, ships cut through calm waters, and coastal radar stations ticked through routine scans that rarely surprised anyone anymore. This region had lived with tension for years, and familiarity had bred a dangerous kind of calm. Operators watched their screens with practiced eyes, expecting little more than weather patterns and scheduled transponders. Then something appeared that did not belong. At first, it was almost nothing. A faint trace on a screen that flickered and then stabilized, moving in a way that suggested intent rather than error. The object had no transponder signal, no identification code, no friendly explanation. It flew low enough to complicate radar clarity, hugging an altitude that blurred the line between civilian airspace and military threshold. The Baltic had seen close calls before, but this one felt different from the very first second it was noticed. The aircraft moved silently across a stretch of sky that bordered multiple NATO nations, its path oddly deliberate. It did not rush. It did not wander. It held a steady course that suggested confidence, as if the pilot knew exactly how far they could go without triggering an immediate international incident. The phrase, "a shadow plane," was not spoken yet, but the feeling behind it already existed in the room where radar officers leaned forward and quietly called supervisors to their stations. Within minutes, secondary systems were activated. Passive sensors, electronic surveillance arrays, and shared NATO feeds began cross-checking the anomaly. Nothing matched. No civilian flight plan, no scheduled military exercise, no emergency signal. The aircraft was real, solid, and intentionally invisible in the ways that mattered most. It was flying dark, a tactic long associated with probing missions designed to test reactions rather than start wars. The Baltic Sea has always been a corridor of power. Empires have fought over it, fleets have sunk beneath it, and modern alliances patrol it with the understanding that any weakness shown here would echo far beyond its waters. When the unidentified aircraft edged closer to Polish-monitored airspace, that history seemed to rise up like cold mist, pressing itself into the present moment. Polish air defense units were alerted almost instantly. This was not a panicked response, but it was fast, rehearsed, and precise. Years of drills, intelligence sharing, and contingency planning snapped into place. Fighter pilots were notified, command centers activated, higher readiness levels, and communication channels with NATO allies were opened without delay. There was no public announcement yet, no dramatic press conference, only the quiet machinery of a state doing exactly what it had prepared itself to do. As analysts watched the radar data evolve, patterns began to form. The aircraft's speed, altitude, and electronic signature aligned with known characteristics of Russian reconnaissance platforms. Not definitive proof, but enough to raise the stakes. These types of missions were designed to collect data: radar frequencies, response times, interceptor launch windows, communication protocols. Every second the plane remained undetected or unchallenged was a small victory for whoever controlled it. Poland's response was shaped by geography and memory. Sitting at the eastern edge of NATO, Poland has long understood that hesitation invites pressure. The country's modern defense posture is built on the belief that clarity and speed reduce risk more effectively than ambiguity. As the shadow plane edged closer, that philosophy guided every decision being made behind closed doors. Fighter jets were scrambled from a nearby base, their engines roaring to life as ground crews moved with urgent efficiency. The pilots did not know exactly what they would find when they reached the contact, only that they were about to meet something that did not want to be seen. The jets climbed rapidly, cutting through the morning sky, guided by vectors constantly updated from command. At the same time, Polish authorities quietly informed NATO Air Command. This was not a request for permission, but a statement of fact. An unidentified aircraft was operating near Allied airspace, and Poland was taking action. The alliance's integrated defense network lit up as analysts in multiple countries began observing the same data stream, adding their own assessments, and preparing for escalation if necessary. When the Polish fighters closed the distance, the reality of the situation became unmistakable. The aircraft was military, heavily modified for stealth and electronic warfare. Its design prioritized reduced radar visibility and signal control, making it a classic example of a platform intended to operate in gray zones just short of open confrontation. The pilots maintained a safe but assertive distance, signaling their presence without direct aggression. For a brief moment, the Baltic sky held its breath. The shadow plane adjusted its course slightly, a subtle move that acknowledged it was no longer alone. This was the dance both sides understood well. Approach, signal, observe. No radio communication was exchanged, but the message was clear. You are seen. You are being watched. You are not welcome to go further. Back on the ground, Polish commanders weighed their options. Forcing the aircraft to land would be an extreme step, one that could trigger unpredictable consequences. Allowing it to continue unchallenged would send the wrong message. The chosen path balanced firmness with restraint. The fighters shadowed the intruder closely, matching its movements and making it impossible for the mission to continue unnoticed. As minutes stretched on, the aircraft turned away, gradually retreating toward international airspace. The immediate danger passed, but the significance of the encounter did not fade with it. Every movement, every signal emission, every second of interaction had been recorded and analyzed. Intelligence teams would spend days dissecting the data, learning as much as possible from a confrontation that never officially happened. News of the incident began to leak in controlled fragments. Defense correspondents hinted at heightened activity over the Baltic. Officials confirmed increased air patrols without naming the cause. In Warsaw, government leaders were briefed in detail. Their discussions focused not on fear, but on signaling. How Poland responded publicly would matter almost as much as what it had done in the air. When the Prime Minister was informed, the reaction was measured but resolute. This was not a surprise, but it was a reminder. The incident underscored why Poland had invested heavily in its military and why it pushed so strongly for NATO unity. In closed meetings, the message was simple. Deterrence only works when it is visible, credible, and immediate. Within hours, Polish air patrols over the Baltic were reinforced. Additional fighters took to the skies, and surveillance assets were repositioned. NATO allies quietly did the same, increasing their presence without fanfare. The alliance did not need to announce a response. The increased activity spoke for itself to anyone watching closely enough. For Russia, the mission had likely achieved some of its objectives while failing in others. It gathered data, tested reaction times, and demonstrated capability. But it also confirmed that Poland's defenses were alert and decisive. There had been no confusion, no delay, no uncertainty. The response had been instant, coordinated, and calm. The broader implications rippled outward. Baltic states watched carefully, reassured by Poland's firmness. Other NATO members saw confirmation that the eastern flank was not a weak point, but a line that would be held. Even countries outside the alliance took note, understanding that gray zone tactics were being met with clear-eyed resistance rather than nervous overreaction. For the public, the story unfolded gradually, framed in careful language. There were no dramatic alarms, no images of confrontation splashed across screens. Instead, officials spoke of routine defense operations and vigilance. This restraint was intentional. Panic would serve no one, and exaggeration would only amplify the intruder's psychological objectives. Yet beneath the calm surface, the incident left a mark. It reminded everyone involved that the line between peace and pressure is often thin and invisible. Modern conflicts are rarely announced with declarations. They arrive quietly, in blips on radar screens and silent aircraft testing boundaries. In military academies and strategy rooms, the encounter would be studied as a case example. How quickly was the contact identified? How effectively were systems integrated? Did the response deter further probing, or would it invite new tests? These questions mattered because they shaped future decisions, not just for Poland, but for the entire alliance. For Polish pilots, the mission became another entry in a long logbook of readiness. They had done their job without incident, without heroics, without mistakes. That professionalism was the real story, even if it never made headlines. It was the kind of success measured not in victories, but in crises that never fully formed. The Baltic Sea returned to its quiet routine, ships moving steadily, civilian aircraft following their assigned paths. But the sense of watchfulness remained. Radar screens continued to glow softly in dim rooms, operators alert to the possibility that the next anomaly might appear at any moment. In Warsaw, policymakers continued their work with renewed focus. Defense budgets, alliance commitments, and strategic communications were no longer abstract debates. They were grounded in a real event that had unfolded in real time just beyond the horizon. The shadow plane episode was over, but its message lingered. Power in the modern world is often exercised in silence, through presence rather than action. Poland's instant response showed that silence does not mean weakness, and calm does not mean complacency. As the day faded into evening, the skies over the Baltic remained clear. But everyone involved knew that clarity was temporary. In a region shaped by history and watched by rivals, vigilance was not a reaction to crisis. It was a permanent state of being. And somewhere beyond the reach of radar, planners on the other side were already reviewing their own data, adjusting their own strategies, and deciding when or if they would test the line again. The game of shadows continued, but one thing was now certain. Poland had made its position unmistakably clear, not with words, but with action taken at exactly the right moment.